Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the undisputed best deck in format. Mew VMAX from Fusion Strike has been getting all the results under its belt and has been doing extremely well. And despite it being the undisputed best deck, there's a ton of dispute around how to play the best deck in the game. And there are two real schools of thought that I'm going to be talking about today. There's going to be the sort of turbo item engine, utilizing a ton of cram-o-matic's VIP passes, Rotom phones, Great Balls, that sort of thing, versus the Peony-based engine, which is going to throw away all your cards and go ahead and tutor two cards that you like straight into hand. So yeah, it's interesting that a deck is doing so well and is yet to be ironed out fully. Of course, it's a new archetype and is quite different to all the other engines out there. It's not playing Inteleon, and it doesn't have to play Houndoom, so it has this license to do what it wants, really, and make the most out of its own engine, which is Genesect. So let's have a quick chat about why Mew is doing so well right now. And really, it's that it just draws more cards than a lot of the other decks in the game, potentially as early as turn 1, if you are able to get multiple of your Genesect Vs into play, each of these having that Fusion Strike system ability, allowing you to draw a number of cards in your hand up to the amount of Fusion Strike Pokemon you have in play. So the idea is to try and get as many Fusion Strike Pokemon into play as possible. Oftentimes multiple Genesects will be a part of that, so you can use this Fusion Strike system over and over again to refill your hand and play unconventionally a very different supporter line to most other decks, where you won't be playing, most likely, Research and Marnie here, because the Genesects do the heavy lifting for you throughout the game, which then allows you to have the Power Spike supporters that we've already mentioned in Peony, but also a Lesser's Sparkle, the acceleration that this deck has access to, as well as Boss's Orders for gusting. And that's really why the deck is so strong. Going first, you can just get an attachment down to Mew, and turn 2, quite easily you can be threatening the Cross Fusion Strike plus a gusting option play, either via Peony Cross Switcher or Boss's Orders himself, and copy that Technoblast from Genesect and deal upwards of 210 damage straight away, and just target down whatever your opponent is attaching to, set them really far behind on tempo, or even deal with certain Pokemon that are for their engine if they've only managed to get 1 or 2 copies of Sobble or Houndour down. Sometimes targeting these can cause big issues for the opponent. So the fact that we draw so many cards means we get to play the sort of greedier supporters much more often, whereas other decks are reliant on, using their own researches and Marnies and whatnot to get themselves set up in the first place. We normally draw enough cards to just naturally have the Mew VMAX already raring to go with the requisite energies as well. So that's kind of why Genesect and Mew are such a perfect combo, because you can be gusting and punishing people whenever you go first, like way more than any other deck in the format. Even when you're not gusting, you represent so much damage into the active position on that turn 2 with either the Max Miracle for a stable 130, which can just knock out a ton of like 1-prize Pokemon, or you can go for that Cross Fusion Strike and copy Genesect for, like I said, 210 upwards thanks to Power Tablet. And that's another big power spike the deck has access to. You can manipulate your damage quite nicely by having certain turns where you use multiple power tablets to augment your damage, so you can knock out toughness caped 2-prize Pokemon, and in some situations, even if you draw enough power tablets or you tutor them out potentially with cram-o-matic or Peony, you can stack these on top of each other and get big one-hit KOs with Technoblast being copied by that Mew as well. So a really, really cool option. The deck just has a lot of flexibility when you draw this many cards. You can really represent your game plan very frequently, but also have the cream on top where you can really be pushing that advantage very early on. So let's have a look at the data quickly with Mew. You can see a breakdown of its win rate into the top decks in the format up at the top there, the top right corner. Essentially, everything is, 40% is kind of like the worst, and that's Gengar-based decks. And also the Umbreon Urshifu single strike deck. These are the sort of negative win rate matchups. But when you're most like teched for difficult matchups are only in that 40% range, it tells you, well, A, that Single Strike isn't the most consistent deck in comparison, but that this deck certainly is consistent. And even in your worst matchup, sometimes just going first and knocking out their, first Pokemon that they're attaching to is enough to just keep you in the game, keep you relevant here. And in certain instances as well, they can just falter at different moments. So you still have a ton of percentage points, even in some of your most difficult matchups, I would say. There are also some single prize decks coming out in the format as well, which can prove a challenge for this archetype in general. But really against the top 10 decks or whatever, you can see here, more than top 10 on the screen, you really can see that there's a lot of positive matchups here, the sort of 55 plus range in a lot of these sorts of instances, which tells you that we are just more consistent than the other decks in the game, and our game plan is just very, very good, stable, efficient damage output with acceleration on top of that, and so much potential to gust and punish some fragile starts from other decks. That's why it's performing so well. In terms of top eights, this is all between November 19th, which is a week after the set was released, so gave everyone the benefit of the doubt in that first week. Decks are still being refined. People hadn't quite got the cards yet in that first week, so I stripped that out of the data. But still, a good 3 weeks worth here of information. And you can see that Mew Genesect is by far the most top-8ing deck. It's also by far the most winningest deck, and making the most finals. So it's going deep into tournaments, despite it being very popular, and despite lots of Mew Genesects running into one another and knocking them out of the tournaments. It is still performing like very, very incredibly well. And you can see the number 2 deck right now is Umbreon Urshifu, which in theory should be reasonable into Mew, and that's kind of why it's also in at that number 2. It's obviously a good deck in its own right, but it's kind of hanging on by the fact that it's got a manageable Genesect Mew matchup. So yeah, the format really is warped around this Mew. That's why we're starting to see things creep into this top 10, like the Eternatus down at the bottom, like that Victini Hammers as well, similarly, like Gengar and pure Gengar based builds, which haven't really been an option before now, but Mew is becoming so powerful, so popular that it is viable, just because you can expect to face enough Mews in a tournament that hopefully that just is worth your time. So yeah, the data really is pointing to Mew Genesect being extremely popular and extremely strong. Among these events, there were 9 turbo builds. Oh, sorry, there were 6 turbo builds and 9 peony builds, finishing either in first or second. So you can see that both of them are seeing a lot of success. Like I was saying earlier, no one's really defined the best build just yet. And both of these are achieving really good results, and there's a whole plethora of them all making top 8s as well. So these are both valid options for sure. So let's go into a bit more detail of these 2 schools of thought. And that is to say that Peony is an optional supporter where typically you would play like 2 Sparkle, 2 Boss, and then like 4 Peony, sometimes 3 copies of the Boss or the Elisa Sparkle as well, depending on where you feel you are in the meta and what you want out of your list. But the Peony oftentimes comes combined with the Cross Switcher. So that's just something to bear in mind, because it means that Peony then acts as a pseudo out to Boss's orders on your turn 2, if you are the player going first, which is just very insane, really, that you have that option being threatened all the time. And then the other school of thought is having an even thicker VIP pass, playing like 4 copies of that, 3 or 4 copies of Cram-o-matic, 3 or 4 copies of Great Ball, 3 or 4 copies of the Rotom Phone, and really going in and basically play every glowing card in your hand on PTCGO and just filter down, draw up as many cards with Genesect every single turn, and you don't have any draw supporter whatsoever in this deck. You are entirely drawing cards from your Genesect, and you're relying solely on your supporters to be like power spike cards, like a very thick line of Boss's Orders here, which is probably 3 or 4 copies, and then 2 to 3 copies of Alessa's Sparkle, which is providing some energy acceleration. One thing I will note about the item heavy build is you have more sort of ability to use Sparkle on turn 1 going second, which could give you some percentage points in certain matchups where you can use a Mew V attack early on for 70 plus damage with power tablets, or even Meloetta if you really are popping off. So those are the 2 kind of schools of thought here right now. So let's talk about the Peony Engine first and the sort of benefits of playing Peony. I'm going to try and remove my biases and look into why both are very strong, so don't worry, there's going to be points for both here. But Peony has definitely some big ticks in his direction. Firstly, you have the better safety net against Path of the Peak. If you're getting hit with Marnie Path, which admittedly isn't a huge amount of archetypes right now, I would say Jolteon is probably the flagship Path deck in the sort of top 10. Victini's just sort of sneaking in there as well. Ice Rider is also in and around those top decks. I think underrepresented personally, but can be a Path of the Peak abuser as well. So just simply, when you see your fresh 5 card hand, once you've drawn for turn after the Marnie, you naturally have more outs, right? Because you have not only your physical stadiums, which can be a 3 or 4 count, you then also have the 3 or 4 Peony that can get you stadium plus another card to carry on drawing with your Genesect and not get disrupted at all by that. Whereas if you are drawing into that 5 card hand, starting your turn as the item-based build, unless you've camped a stadium to the top of your deck from a previous Rotom phone on the turn beforehand, you only have your 3 or 4 stadium counts plus flipping heads from cram-o-matic, which is far less guaranteed. Sometimes if that cram just flips tails, even if you did draw into it, you're back at square one. So yeah, and you're just not doing much. You're completely put at a standstill. Also, I would say that guaranteed tutoring really lets you map out your turns a lot more sort of safely and securely in comparison to the randomness of some of these items, or if you're just digging with Genesect and you happen to whiff. There are certain times avenues that come your way by thinking, okay, if I draw enough cards, flip the heads of the cram-o-matic that's in my hand, I can maybe make these power spikes happen. But sometimes, obviously, you can start by playing out like throwing down a couple power tablets, then flipping a cram-o-matic, and then it gets tails. Or like you start playing those tablets knowing that you can Genesect and into a cram, and then like a cram can hit your last copy or whatever. And sometimes they just miss, right? And it's not as good of a feeling as simply having like 1 tablet, 1 Peony in hand, knowing you can go triple tablet KO, that sort of thing. So the dealing with guarantees rather than dealing with what ifs means that you don't waste resources and don't like chase avenues that can put you into a bad spot when it doesn't all come to fruition by the end of your like crazy dig turn. And you could argue that like it's low odds that you whiff because you have so much draw potential in the item build, and you also have like the Rotom phones which see an additional 5 cards before you get to draw with the Genesect. So I get to see the argument that, you know, you draw so many cards that oftentimes you can still hit these pieces, but just making sure that it's not like an issue ever with the Peony is always a nice thing to have. You're dealing with guarantees here. I also think that you have more turn 2 gust options by playing the Peony list. Oftentimes the Cram combo list is playing just 4 boss and then like Cram-o-matics, Rotom phones, and sometimes gears. But the Peony Engine has the physical 4 Peony, the 2 to 3 bosses orders, I would say, and then they just have the random situations where they have 2 cross switches in hand, or they have cross switcher Rotom phone, and they phone into second switcher and then just draw into that second switcher. So you actually have a really good amount of turn 2 gust pressure with the Peony list if you feel like that's the play. So yeah, it gives you a ton of pressure and really stamps your authority on games when you are the player going first, and that's what gives you a huge amount of your win rates. Essentially, Mew going first is like an 80% win rate against like everything, I would say, apart from like Gengar, which is like going first, you're still at least even, I would say. Your overall negative is because sometimes you go second against Gengar and it feels really bad. So yeah. And then the final benefit is that you have extra dig potential on non-gusting turns. So, like I was saying, it's that turn 2, you have the Peony in hand, but you don't need to actually go for a boss's orders play. If you were playing the Cramo item build, the Lysander would just sit in hand and you would be clogged in that instance. And you could still go crazy drawing with cards and motoring with your items, but the Peony could let you do some guaranteed things, like go ahead and guarantee a Fog Crystal for an attachment that turn, go ahead and grab an Incense for a guaranteed evolve on the bench as well, so you have that secured for next turn no matter what they can do, and then you've cleared your hand completely down so you can draw a fresh like 5 or 6 cards from Genesect and carry on that way and start setting up for the following turn. There are many times as well when I've played a Peony Engine where I will go for 1 card plus a Peony for next turn, so then I'm once again threatening cross switches or a power tablet swing, you know, so you can do setup and just clear the hand down if you really want to with a Peony list on instances where the active Pokemon is the thing you want to knock out. Whereas if you're the item build, you will basically either choose to Sparkle or choose to not boss, and then you're just holding a boss for next turn, which is like completely fine. But I'm just saying that you can get more developed with the Peony build if that's your option. Like if you want to throw away the hand, you can do so and just start thinning the deck much more naturally. So here's going to be a skeleton list for Peony. So just 53 cards here. So there are 7 slots to play around with. And you can see that there is still an element of VIP Pass, Cram, and Rotom Phone, but just far less so, I would say. I think VIP Pass is solidly at a 1 count when you are playing the Peony list, because it means that it's a great option as the player going second on your first turn. If you have Peony, Peony for VIP Pass is always a decent play. You can do it alongside Rose Tower. You can do it alongside Fog Crystal for guaranteed attachment at the same time, or an extra, a basic that you can put out. So you're just almost using it like a Bridget style effect where you go VIP Pass, Fog Crystal, you grab Mew, double Genesect, start drawing all your Genesects and see if more can come from that sort of thing. So that's always a decent option. Cram-o-matic as well, I still feel is reasonable as a 1 count, and I've played it solidly as a 1 anyway in the deck because you have cross switches, and sometimes you're naturally looking at like discarding these in certain instances rather than playing them. And a 1-off Cram doesn't feel like it's clogging too much. It can sometimes grab you things that you need. It's extra access to Sparkle and Boss and that sort of thing. It's not like a bad card by any means. You're just leaning into it much less so in this sort of build. And I still think Rotom Phone has its place here. And again, 2 would kind of be a safe zone for me, I would say. Because again, it can help you with those cross-switcher plays. You've got one in hand, you've got a Rotom Phone in hand, see what's on the top 5 of the phone. Maybe it's that cross-switcher play, and it means you don't have to play Peony that turn. Or you can make a gusting play via the Rotom Phone and then Peony afterwards that can get you even more pieces, like if you need your VMAX attachment or if you need your power tablets as well to finish things off, you can go for those sorts of lines. So yeah, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be playing VIP Pass, Cram-o-matic, Rotom Phone. I'm saying that Peony in general is just like a very strong build here, and like combining the 2 things is like by no means a bad thing at all. So yeah, that's kind of a skeleton here. Let's talk about what we could do with these extra spaces that we have. Obviously, there's always the option of just adding additional copies of certain cards, and you could see there I only had 1 incense. You could certainly increase that to 2 to 3 if you really wanted to, as well as Great Ball could increase in count. I was only at 6 energy, which kind of makes me a little bit nervous. I think I would naturally sit at 7, 8, possibly. So maybe some capture energy can come in if you're not too concerned about Fan of Waves. If you are more concerned of Fan, you can go to like 7 Psychic relatively easily. It's something that you don't really want to miss out on, and because there's so much Fan of Waves in the format right now, you want to be attaching basic energy turn 1 so that you're safe against just the energy disruption that people can be teching into their decks right now to beat Mew. So that's always something to bear in mind. I think I like sitting around 7 to 8 energy as my lowest count whenever I'm playing the Peony list at least. The item-based list has a bit more license to be greedier with its count because it draws more cards in the opening turns, especially turn 1 going first, because you don't have the supporter to fall back on, you just have the tons of items. Whereas this list, the Peonies are dead as the player going first turn 1. There are some other like sort of tech cards. Crystal Cave is a great tech card for Jolteon and other spread-based decks. Latias Package is really annoying for certain attackers. It's actually pretty nice for Mirror as well, opening up that Dyna barrier. Just on your sort of off turns, I guess you could say, where you only have like 1 tablet, you can force Gusting from the opponent and force an awkward prize race in certain instances. And the Mountains can be a 4th Stadium card option. If you are playing the Latias, it makes sense to play this card because it can be an extra tutor for you and a 4th Stadium card that you can play. The reason why you play different Stadium cards is so that you can always insta-play your next one, so they never end up clogging your hand. I think there's also an option to play 2 copies of the best Stadium in your opinion, whether you think it's Rose Tower, whether you think it's Old Cemetery, if you're like worried about Suicune, for example. It could be seen as a tech card to play a 2nd copy of Cemetery. And Cemetery is even good into the single strike matchups because they can take more damage on top of their Houndoom damage, which puts them sometimes into range with tablets and Vitband and that sort of stuff. So yeah, and Fan of Waves again, when you have tutoring effects from Peony, feels like you can time this at a good moment in the game quite often, and there's a ton of special energy in the game right now. So these are all reasonable options, I would say, to move around with those 7 slots. Now let's turn our attention to the Turbo Engine and the benefits of that one. After giving my piece about Peony, there are still a ton of benefits to the Turbo Engine as well. Naturally, you have less supporter cards and items as well because the cross switches can get clogged in hand that get trapped. So because you're just naturally playing less supporters in general, and because Sparkle / Boss can always be seen as an insta-play if you feel like it's right on that turn, you really don't have any clog factor in that instance. You also have more control over your discards. Sometimes you can be sat on a hand where you need to peony and discard things to tutor certain effects, but it means you're having to throw away things like Power Tablet and whatnot, just so that you can use that peony that turn. Or if you're forced to peony cross switcher rather than like just use a boss, sometimes it means you're discarding like one of your copies of Mew VMAX, and that can be a problem if like you've prized one, for example. So you have much more control over what you are actually discarding with this item-based build, and you don't get like wrecked by awkward peonies that you sort of need to play in the game. So that's kind of nice. You're also a little bit safer against Fan of Waves, because I do think you have better access to Sparkle when you're playing just this list. Usually because you play 3 copies of Sparkle anyway in this build, it's becoming much more popular just because of Meloetta. But also because you have the Rotom Phones, sometimes Poker Gear, and just the Cram Heads flip just naturally gets you into Sparkle that little bit more often. So you are, in theory, a little bit better at just getting wrecked by like KO active plus Fan of Wave bench, or just Fan of Waves, Marnie, and those sorts of plays in general. If you're a little bit behind on the attachment game, the Sparkle is much easier to access in the item-based list, and you're just naturally drawing more cards because you have much more insta-play here, and just more Cram, more Rotom Phone, that sort of thing. And I also think that the sort of biggest payoff in my eyes for the Turbo item-based build is that Meloetta becomes a really good option, and actually is kind of like the biggest high roll in the game that we have right now. If you're able to go Meloetta, a lesser Sparkle, attach a Fusion Energy, turn 1, going second, you can be representing 210 damage plus Power Tablet math as well. So it is a bit of a high roll, but it's not actually that crazy to think about, because like starting a Mew, you naturally have your switch out. You have Fog Crystal for Meloetta, and like any Cram Heads can be committed to your supporter if you want it to, and then you can just be digging for that last Fusion Strike Energy, which again, you play 4 copies, there's like not a low chance that one just naturally starts in your hand, for example. So it may, you of course need to get into your VIP passes and get into your basics in the first place, but it's not actually like the uber nuts, but it can feel really, really powerful if you get that tempo. And I think it's something that you can't really do with the Peony list. Like the maximum tempo you can do is a Psycho Jump play, whereas Meloetta here can offer way more consistent damage because you just have extra push potential with your trainers in the opening turn. So the tempo going second with this build is far, far superior, I would say. So here is going to be a skeleton for a sort of cram-o-matic item-based build. You can see that we've subbed out the peonies for an increased boss's orders count right now. And you can see that there are a ton more items in here, essentially. We've ramped up the VIP pass count. I've now said cram-o-matic and Rotom Phone are a minimum 3 copies. And I would also say that Great Ball is a minimum 3 copies as well. We're still playing the same stadium trio. I think those are like the 3 best stadiums right now. And then the 4th stadium is kind of your choice. I think in this list, it's much more likely that Rose Tower will be your 2 of copy stadium card, because you go so low with your hand in the opening turns because you have so much insta play that Rose Tower gets value a lot more often, and you're much more likely to stay at this 6 energy count, unlike the Peony list where I was saying I would be more comfortable sitting at 7 or 8 energies. I think you can feel relatively comfortable at 6 or 7. So that's a small like space advantage there that you gain because you naturally draw more cards in the opening with this list, and you always have the random out of like cram-o-matic into Sparkle or cram-o-matic into a natural attachment as well, if need be. So these are all things to bear in mind. So those last 6 slots, usually they're just going to be increasing the counts of the stuff that you already have. Like I said, Rose Tower is a very solid 2 of stadium. Cram-o-matic up to 4 count. 4 counts, Great Ball up to 4 counts, Sparkle up to 3 feels pretty good as well, I would say. Or potentially having Gear in here as well as like a stopgap, because obviously Gear is an insta-play, but gives you the same dig potential for that Sparkle on turn 1 that gives you that huge payoff going second. Obviously, you will still always choose to go first with this deck, no doubt. But when you do go second, you have this fallback of Meloetta. And I feel like the 2 are kind of mutually exclusive. I wouldn't really expect to play Lati in this list because it feels far weaker. Potentially you could play 1 and 1 if you really wanted to, but Meloetta seems like the best option when you are playing the Turbo list because you have this backdoor potential of just having a very good opening hand, maybe a cram-o-matic heads, the one that starts in your hand or whatever, can turn you into this very, very solid board state where you get the Meloetta swinging with that Echo early on. So yeah, the options are there. Then there's the same tech cards like Vitband, Fan of Waves, which I wouldn't call staples, but they are certainly decent. The Crystal Cave as well being that fourth copy if you're worried about Jolteon, for example. Air Balloon is potentially a little bit more valuable in this list because you don't have Cross Switcher, so naturally increasing your switch count as well as your Air Balloon potential include, or even Escape Rope could be an include in your list. These are all things to bear in mind now that you are taking out some switch outs in general. So that's both lists. That's kind of the pros and cons of both. And it's still probably too early to tell. Mew has such a ridiculous win rate that it's still hard to identify which is actually best in the meta right now. It's suffering from success in the fact that we don't actually know the best methods. So somewhat down to personal preference, what you like to see in your opening hands. Do you like the thrill of getting heads flips and having some of the most powerful turns available, but also knowing that those flips on a tails could mean that you're sort of dead in the water? Do you like the more sort of stable approach with the Peony? Do you like having the pop-off insta-win plays with that turn 1 Meloetta going second and can springboard you back into good shape even in some of your worst matchups like Gengar? I think that is the one big selling point that I'm starting to see around the Cram build, which I kind of underestimated. Like early Cram combo builds, I didn't see big payoff until the Meloetta started to come in. And now I see that there is like big payoff that you can have one of the highest tempo turn 1 plays, similar really to if a Suicune deck happens to high roll the Melanie play, right, and goes wide on their bench. Now Meloetta provides sort of equal tempo possible. And is far less of a high roll, I would say. So you can just have very aggressive turn 1 damage, which I think is kind of lacking with the Peony build right now. So if Single Strike continues to gain popularity as the best check to Mew, I can foresee Meloetta being more and more of a staple. When before I was thinking that it was more of like a win more card in those situations where you randomly had a lot of energy to play and you had the like license to sparkle. Now I see it much more as like, I've gone second, I have to sparkle to stay in this race because I'm up against Single Strike, and me just passing into them will basically always lose me the game because you just have nothing that can sponge a hit at any point. So yeah, I like having that defense open, and I'm kind of sold on Meloetta now, which I think is really cool. So I'm just going to leave you with one final thought, which is a hybrid option. Now that I've given you the benefits of both, why not try and fit both, I guess, is somewhat of a mentality here. So this is, you know, somewhere down the middle where you're playing the cross switches Peonies. I think those are like my biggest reasons to play Peony, I would say. And then you are just playing still a high package of the Crams, the Rotom Phones, and obviously you have reduced that boss's orders count, but you're flip-flopping for Peony, which is now essentially like one of those options you can have in hand. So what I will say about this hybrid is that it doesn't feel like great because you are only playing 3 stadiums, you're not playing Vitband, you're not playing any tech trainer cards, which you have a bit more space for in, you know, one of the 2 divisions that you go down, like whether you go down the pure Peony path or the aggressive item path. You have that little bit more space to play with, like 1 or 2 slots, I would say, to have the luxury, like, extra energy card or the extra tech item if you feel like Fan is worthwhile, or if you feel like Latias is worth coming into this list, to play both sides, like aggro and defense. So a hybrid is just an option that I was thinking of. I haven't seen many hybrid lists. I feel like people are very rigidly stuck into one camp or another. So I think seeing a hybridization could be an interesting development going forward. And by how much I'm enjoying Meloetta right now, I think I'm trying to hybrid with my Mew. So let me know your thoughts. Which do you think is best? Are you team Peony or are you team cram-o-matic VIP Turbo Trainer? It feels really like awkward calling it team cram-o-matic because it makes you feel like you're just a high roller, but there's genuinely reasons to play both. So it's like team Turbo or team Peony, I guess. Let me know your thoughts down below. I hope you did enjoy, and let me also know how you're trying to beat Mew if you're not playing it. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.